Where does and where should creativity fit into our life in our modern world? Which itself is such a funny question, because everywhere throughout man's history, wherever they were, it was modern to them. But then we learn new things, we discover new things, we create new things, and we recognize that times past were somewhat archaic. We're so advanced now. But what is the importance of being creative? Is it simply the resulting beauty, that beautiful timeless painting, that song? Is it even kind of the extras of life? Well, the guest that I have on today, Angie, is a creative for sure. She is a self-proclaimed artist. She creates paper, macrame. She teaches, even as she teaches yoga, and you'll hear her express that it is another expression of her creativity. And during the conversation, it just reinforced the power of being creative. So how important is creativity to you? Listen as Angie expresses not just what she does, but why she does it, and enjoy.
I've heard it said that in America, or even in Western culture, we're always striving. We could have more money. We could have an elevated status. Like there's always this possibility for something else. And so that leaves this constant emptiness and longing. But in some places, where there's a lot of poverty in India, but I've never seen people who lived in such poverty with such happiness. And you really felt that there. Like they were just in awe of life in itself. And to me, that was something that it like reminded me that that's what we're here for. It's not all about the striving all the time.
Beautiful. I know I'll mess it up, but I remember hearing a story once. Bear with me. So there's a fishing village, and somebody from outside would come and say, would you like to sell? Like, I want to help you to make more money. And so the old fisherman said, well, why would I want to make more money? And he would say, well, so that you can have the kind of money so you can do the kinds of things you want. Like what? We said, well, now all you do is you just fish, and then you just sleep, and then you just go home. Well, what would change if I had more money? Well, you could do anything. You could, just like you said, you could strive and you could become wealthy. And then in the middle of the day, you could just take a nap. Or if you had time, you could just go fish, and you'd have more time for your family. We are so the propaganda of the reach. It isn't even the goal. It's like the reaching is the goal.
Yeah, it's like a constancy. And I feel that in my body too. Like I feel that.
Of course.
And Sicily is like that too. They have the siesta in the afternoon
I can't even fathom it.
From like 1 to 4, everything shuts. Like too bad if you want to go to the store at 2 in the afternoon.
1 to
Nothing's
4.
open.
Seriously, from 1 to 4. It just
it's like a long length of time like that. It's like everybody goes home to their families. They have lunch, a big lunch. They take a nap, and then they go back. And then they'll work until like 8. So things will be open till 8. And then they have dinner.
I have the opportunity to speak with you today, Angie Follensbee-Hall, and we were connected through Cheyenne Vaughn, who is so lovely and has been on this podcast before. But I would just like to know what it is that you do, and at least as importantly, why you love doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have recently landed on the description that I'm an artist and a teacher. And so I make art, I make handmade paper and mixed media wall tapestries, I make bound books out of the paper, and I teach. I teach art, I teach creativity, and I teach yoga. That's been a big part of my path as well. And I train people to be teachers, yoga teachers.
Oh.
And so, and this is more recent that I really realized these are the same things. I'm really teaching the same thing when I'm teaching. And I've had people say to me, you teach art the same way you teach yoga. And so I thought, oh, that's probably wise. I really feel like I'm just teaching the same thing.
So have you been doing both kind of simultaneously throughout your life? First creating and doing yoga, and then transitioning to teaching creativity and teaching yoga?
I started with the art. I started teaching. I studied art in college. I decided I was be a fine artist, and I have a BFA degree. And when I got out of college, I started teaching art. I taught a few community college art classes and private workshops, and I exhibited art. I'm a member of the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen
Oh, nice.
and the New Hampshire Art Association. I lived in New Hampshire until just a few years ago.
What was your medium initially?
It was the same.
It was.
I've been working with handmade paper ever since my college years.
Oh,
I learned it. I thought at first I would be an art teacher, in a school system, and we learned how to make paper as a, like a project for teaching kids, and I loved it so much that I just kept doing it for me.
that's an
Gina.
intriguing art. I said before that I want to be able to record you creating because it seems like that process would just be so interesting, almost messy, but
Oh yeah,
really great way.
it's totally messy. Kids love it. That's why you teach it. They
Sure.
love it. They're just like splashing around, and I teach people to like put plant fibers in and layer different things, and people love it. People love it. Kids love it. I think adults like it because it gets us in touch with feeling like a
What
kid.
what kind of plant fibers do you put in there? You said plant fibers?
I did, yeah, because it's all paper. Handmade paper is all from plant fibers. It's the cellulose fibers that are what make paper paper.
Okay.
So I use all kinds of things. I use plants that grow in the garden. So I usually start with a base. These days I use just a base of like cotton, but you can make the base out of plant materials from your garden. It's just very labor intensive, so I don't tend to do that part of it by hand quite as much. You can get paper pulp that's sort of half processed. It looks like paper, but then you add it to a blender and you put the water back into the fibers, and then you can add different dyes or put. I'll take when you eat corn on the cob. I save the corn husks, and I let them dry, and then I plop those in a blender just fast, and so they still stay kind of chunky. And then I'll spread those in the paper pulp, and it leaves a beautiful fiber. The corn
Oh,
fibers are beautifully woven in there.
that sounds like a raw
Yeah,
linen almost. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I would say, yeah, it's similar to that, isn't it?
wow.
I'll take onion skins, and you're cutting up an onion and those beautiful red skins. I just save them, and then you can do the same thing, and then they'll add a lovely texture. If it comes across my path, it could end up in my paper bag. But yeah, I made paper from a lot of different. If it has cellulose fibers, you can make paper out of it, or you can easily add it to paper. That's another pulp that's being processed. So, what doesn't have cellulose fibers? If you think of like an orange peel, you can't, like, if I blend up an orange peel, it's just granular, right? It
Okay.
probably has cellulose fibers on a much smaller level, but I can't do much with those fibers. So you need these long fibers that interlock together to make
Interesting.
paper.
Is it very time intensive? You said it can be labor intensive. Does it take a long time as well?
It does. It's a process, and it has stages, right? So, if you're making paper from total scratch, like I went out in the garden, I gathered some plants, starting there, you've got to cook it. You have to put it in a pot with some kind of caustic solution, like a washing soda or something, and cook down the fibers and rinse it, rinse it, rinse it, so that you're just getting the fibers. And then you got to beat it. And some people beat it with like an old stick, or there's different blenders, or I used to have a Hollander beater. I don't have anymore, but it's like a big trough with a gear that kind of separates the fibers. So it needs to get beaten. Once the fibers are cooked, they need to get beaten. And then once they're beaten, then you can add those fibers to a tub of water and start putting a screen in to make paper. So I don't do a lot of that first stage, right? Where I'm growing it and cutting it and
Okay.
cooking it, eating it. I have done that, and it's fun to play with that, but you need an awful lot of plant fiber to make paper that way, like acres.
Okay.
So I start with a tub of water and in the pulp I can just process it in a blender, and it makes it look like mushy oatmeal. And then I throw that in my tub, and then I can like dip a screen and pull off sheets that way.
What's that like when you're in the process? What's it like in your mind? Are you so absorbed in it that that's what you're focused on, or does it allow you to just sort of, it sounds almost therapeutic, really.
It is. I definitely fall into like a flow
You do.
space with it. Yeah. And at this point, I've been doing this for 20 years now. So once I start making paper, I'm just in it. I'm just in it.
What's it like as you're watching little kids for the first time?
It's fun. I mean, they have a lot of fun.
Yeah. And the
They
excitement
love
of
it.
seeing it become something else. So
Yeah. And you know what I love about kids, especially, I don't know, probably 10 and younger, they don't have any fear. Like
right.
they don't care if it doesn't come out quite, like they just like slopping it down, and
Yeah.
there's no fear, there's no judgment. Something switches and like I'll see adults do it and they get really kind of scared and they're like, did I do it right? And does it look right? And that's the thing I notice. And uh, kids just have an abandon and freedom with it.
Nice. Yeah, I would think so with kids, especially because you're actually, it's morphing into something else. So it's one thing to take a piece of paper and to draw on it, but to take this texture and make it into something else, that must be such a fun experience. And you said that you create notebooks and all of that. Do you actually sell those?
Yeah, I do. Actually I can grab a little book sample if you
Yes,
want to see. Like
please.
right.
Yeah.
So what I'm really making is art books. So they're
Oh, Angie, look at this. Oh my goodness.
there's
What?
lots of
Is that
layers.
macrame? Go back one. What was that, macrame
Oh,
art paper?
that's actually not macrame. That is an old doily.
Yeah.
So I go to antique stores and I buy, there's mountains of old doilies and tea towels in antique stores.
Mm.
And to me, these represent like women's handiwork from older times, and this is what women did.
Right.
And so there's something about that I feel drawn to, and I
Mm.
like attaching it to. So it's just stitched onto this paper, and so I make art books out of the paper,
Wow.
and lots of layers. So there's different
That's
there's
incredible.
cloth, there's plant fibers in here. There's lots of layers of paint.
Oh, I love
There's
that one. Sorry, I
this
keep
one
stopping you. No,
for
go
the
back
opaque.
one. The edge of the one on your left hand, the dark color.
Yeah, yeah. That's a collaged piece here.
Wow,
Yeah. So I clearly have a lot of fun doing this.
that's beautiful. It's so
So
textural.
yeah, that's what I say. Like I can't use plain paper. I just can't get that. I
Yeah.
tried to make it like that. It just doesn't work.
Right. I've seen some people, they'll take regular paper and then burn the edges to get that sort of effect. And well, bravo for them for trying, but that's really a work of art. That's
I've
beautiful.
tried. I've tried really hard with plain paper because it would make the whole process a lot faster. But I realize that's not why I'm here. I
No.
have to make it.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about that before we started recording, how you had taken a trip to India and even spending time in Sicily, the different mindset. And can you talk about how that even impacts your art? Yes, but also your interaction with your students.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, the thing I love about cultures like Sicily and India is I think there's a way that they step back and just absorb what is. We were talking about Sicily having like that siesta time where they don't do anything from like 1 to 4.
Yeah.
Everybody goes home, they eat lunch, and then they take a nap. And actually, they do that in India too. I remember we were in an ashram and we'd eat lunch, and then it was nap time. I remember. But I think there's something in that helps us to stop and to pause, um, and I feel like that's what I'm doing with the art, with the work that I have is
Mhm.
it's I have to be active to create the work, but it's a reflection of that pause. It's a reflection of me stepping back and just being like, what's around me? What do I have? I had this realization recently I've talked about in my yoga classes with my students that, we look at our phones the way that our ancestors used to look at the stars.
Oh, tell me more about that. What do you mean?
So how much time do we spend on our phone? I get this little weekly report. It says, oh, you spent 2 hours and X number of minutes on your phone last week. And I think about our ancestors of old thousand years or more, just looked up. Like they knew what was going on in those stars. They had an intimate knowledge of all the movements. And I think of all the constellations that they've named. And I think all the common people had a good sense of that too. And not just the astronomers or whoever were recording that, but we don't look up. Like, how often do we look up at the sky, up at the stars? Would I will I even me, and I'm like, oh, thinking about this, I look at my phone probably more than I look up. So
Mm.
it's just something I've been sitting with a lot. I mean, whoa, I need to look at the sky a little bit more, right? And I feel like that pause, like, we don't need to go to work. We're going to take a siesta. We're going to pull back. That gives us that opportunity to sort of lift our gaze and look up. So I try to capture like a touch of that in
Mm.
the work that I do because it's so nature based. It's so drawn like literally from the natural world.
Right. And it's so fascinating speaking with you because I've spoken to some people who are drawn to the creation, to the natural world, and they have there's almost a disconnect from the humans around them because they want to relieve themselves from the stress of society. But it seems like you found this really lovely balance where you can incorporate that love for what we see around us and try to almost implant it in your students. Do people
Yeah, I feel like I am trying to remind people. I mean, even in my work, I put a lot of words in my work, even not only in the books, but in the wall pieces, the wall tapestries. And I feel like I'm just there's something about words that catches our attention differently.
Mm.
And I'm like, I'm speaking to you, like I'm speaking to you. I want to remind you that this is where our attention should be. I do feel like that's something I'm trying to do in the work.
Can you talk more about the wall tapestries? I don't think I knew that you did that. I don't even know what application that would be used for. Is it
Sure.
literally like a hanging or is it attached to the wall?
They are. I mean, I'm not technically weaving, but they hang on the wall.
Oh,
So that's why I call them tapestries. So this is a pretty recent one where,
the
um,
colors.
so it's very similar to the book,
Yes, I see.
um, but it's designed to hang on the wall.
I see.
And that's the difference. But even then I don't know if you can see, there's words in there.
Oh, I did not see that before. No.
And usually they're not linear and all the time. They're maybe sometimes poetic and just usually have pointers, I'd say, towards the natural world, like something reminding us to
Mm.
look outside, to notice the tree or something like that.
And you
Like
have
this one,
children. You have children yourself, yes.
I do, yeah, but they're older. And I hardly think of them as children now. They're teenagers
Do
with
they
driving.
do you see them with the same struggles with trying to connect? I won't even say reconnect with nature because for many people there was never that initial introduction. You think of
Yeah, I
kids
was on a
today and you're right. I mean, it's like a third arm. They're just walking with a phone all the time.
all of us, right? I
Yeah.
mean, and it definitely has the phone has its place
Oh
and the
yeah.
technology has its place, but there is this funny line where I think we're also losing something.
Mhm.
And it's important to name that what it is. But I was on a call recently. We were talking about children and technology and the idea of being wild. And you're maybe similar to me. Like my childhood, I was outside. My mom, we were home in the summer. My mom said, "Go outside. I don't want you inside for
Mhm.
at least 5 hours." And so I was outside. I was in the woods for hours. So I think there's something that they're missing. I see it. And I honestly don't know what to do about it. All I can do is like say, don't forget. Don't
Right.
forget about
Redirect them. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
one of the things that Cheyenne had mentioned in her description of you was how you have a strong belief that creativity can and should be woven throughout all of our lives, which I was really drawn to because I feel like there's this misnomer that people think they either are a creative or they are not a creative. And for those who are not, you just can't help but think, oh, what are they missing? Like they just don't know what they're missing. So tell me more about your view on that.
Yeah. Well, I think that creativity is our birthright. I mean, just the very fact that we're human means that we're creative. We look around and we think about, oh, I could use this way, or I need this, like I need survival or whatever it is I need. How can I make that happen in my surroundings? And that's the pulse that draws creativity ultimately. But I think that we live in a world that we don't have to engage creativity to survive so much anymore. Uh, so we don't make a practice of it. And I think that's really the main thing that I want to remind people is like, no, it's I identify as an artist, fully identify as an artist. And I think because I do, I make a practice. If I'm not practicing my art, practicing creativity, then I'm not in my identity. I'm not in my role. Um, but because I have that, I make it a priority. But I think that you don't have to have that identity to make it a priority. I think that people are creative all the time and they don't even realize it. There's something that they're doing is already creative. They just don't realize it. And it could be even more woven through their life if they recognize it and then they make a practice of it.
And that's what
And I
I think
think,
is exceptional. I'll be honest with you. I think that that is that puts joy. I think it puts a level of joy in our lives that is missing, but is inherently part of what we desire. Because you hear things like, I have to make dinner, or I have to paint my living room, instead of I get to. And I'm not just talking about the semantics. I'm not saying that if you say the words, it's going to change it necessarily. But there is such an empowerment in knowing that you get to choose, you get to do these things and express yourself. And I love that about
yeah,
what you do and how you incorporate
absolutely.
that into your teaching as well.
I think it's so important. I don't teach methods, even in my yoga teaching, I don't teach in a method necessarily. I think there's a process, but I'm not trying to mass produce any certain kind of result. Like I don't have like a specific sequence that I think everybody needs to follow.
Mm,
Uh, I feel like I want to know what draws you and what interests you, and then how you can bring that out even more. That's really what pulls me in my teaching, so that, like you said, it brings joy into your life. Like
yeah.
that's, I think, what we're here for. And when we really embrace that, then we're very joyful.
Do you meet with a lot of resistance? I mean, do you meet those people who just say, "Oh, I would love to be able to do that, but I'm just not creative"?
Oh yeah,
You do.
absolutely. Oh yeah.
Oh, how
I
do you
hear it all the
respond?
time.
Seriously, how do you respond to that? How do you help them to get past it? So if somebody is listening right now and they think, "Oh, making your own paper, that sounds really interesting." And we'll have clips of the video so that they can see the work that you do. Um, but then they dismiss it as, "That's cool that other people do that." Do you know what I mean? So what would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something that's calling everybody in some way, and that needs, and those are the messages that will replay. Like if I say, "Oh, I'm talking about paper," and it really interests somebody, they might go, "That's so cool. I'd love to do that one day." And then they never have that thought ever again. Maybe it wasn't for them. But if it comes back, and then somehow
Oh,
it comes back again, then I say that's a thread that's calling you, and you should probably follow it. Um, and I think I was listening to something recently where they were talking about this very thing. There's a discomfort, right? And sometimes it's when that discomfort of the resistance um is not as great as whatever discomfort you're in, right? Like, so I
mm,
want to change my life, and there's a little bit of resistance, but then you get to this pivotal point where it's so uncomfortable just continuing this path,
yes,
that the discomfort of the resistance is now less
yes.
than that path. And when sometimes you have to wait until that moment comes where you're just driven to this point of, I need to make a change, and that's it. There's a way for everybody to tap into that creative joy.
Mm.
Uh,
And to look at it as a means to an end in itself, the actual creativity. I know there's a photographer I follow, I consider as a bit of a mentor, and she makes the point because she's also a businesswoman who has had to transform herself. And she says, "You choose your pain. Choose your pain. You can you can recognize that with growth there is pain, and that can make you hesitate. But you can also and should
with
recognize
growth,
that there
there's
is
growth,
pain in
and
the
it can make,
atrophy. The sitting and not moving forward is itself pain. So just choose." Which outcome do you want? And then just walk toward that outcome. And I think creativity is one of those things that it's sad that in education, even in school, if they're trying to the school's trying to fix the budget. What's the first thing to go? Music, arts, things like
Oh,
that, as though they are superfluous
mhm.
instead of
And
feeding us.
mhm. And what if we flipped that script and they were the important thing? I mean, math and science and your writing and reading, they have their absolute place. But if
Mhm.
if arts and drama and music got elevated to that status of math,
Right.
I mean, they were there long before the math was, long before the science was. In the history of humanity, we were artists and musicians first.
And they are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
That yeah, of course, somebody who is drawn to the arts would benefit from learning about science because you've even explained yourself. You've expressed that the nature of us is a race. If you need something, you need to create it, but you also need to understand the science behind it to some extent, at least,
Yeah.
or you learn
It's
it as you
helpful.
go.
It's not just entertainment. I think the arts get shifted into the realm of entertainment. And
Right.
I think that's where the shift has to come, is like, no, it's a need. It's essential. It's our well-being. And it's not just
Right.
entertainment.
So
Exactly.
you've identified yourself as an artist. Is that how, if I were to ask you the question, how do you want to be seen? Is that what you would say, or is there more to it?
I would definitely say, yeah, I definitely want to be seen as an artist. Like, I know I have a lot of identities, but that's the one that's the most important to me. Like, I want to be seen as an artist, and I want to be seen as a woman who just fully embraces her creative passion.
And
That's really,
it's
that's
it's
what I
so
want.
clear you do. I think we're going to have to show some of this video because just to see what you have around you, that you've created this environment. And you said you have a yoga space in your home, is that right? Do I remember
I
correctly?
do, yeah. So
Mm.
we were talking earlier about my home. It's kind of a wild home. It was an old cheese factory in the 1890s. It was designed to sell cheese, cow milk based cheese. And be where this house is situated, close to Windsor, Vermont, where there's a train station. The train station would go into Boston. So it was ideally situated to have the farmers bring their milk to this location. They'd make cheese here, and then they'd send it to the next town over Windsor and ship it into Boston through the train. And so the first floor of this house was the cheese producing facility where the milk would come in and they'd make the cheese. The cheese maker lived on the second floor, which is where my family, we live now on the second floor of this house, and the cheese was stored in the third floor. Um, so it's always been a building that facilitates like making. uh, and so my yoga studio is on what was the cheese making facility, the first floor of this
Okay.
house. Yeah.
Even things like that. And I don't think it's a stretch. I believe there will be some people who think it is. I don't think it's a stretch. I think of cheese and wines and teas that start with the most fundamental of ingredients. But the thing that makes it different is the creative nature of the person behind it. I mean, if you think of wine, it's grapes. It's this process. But then it's also where from the earth it's grown and the person whose hands are directing it and all of that. I just think it's such a fascinating. I roast my own coffee. I mean, uh, pre-amateur, but still, I roast my own coffee, and I'm so fascinated to see this green bean before I do anything with it. It's so different than all the other green beans that I buy, and it's just such a cool process to see it.
Yeah, you're
It's like a
so
mix of
right.
art and science. It's so cool.
You're so right. Yeah, it's exactly that process. It's like an alchemy, right? You have this thing and you like, through your will and your desire, you transform it into this other thing.
Yes, yeah, and sometimes it comes out terribly, but that's
Right.
okay. It's
Try
okay.
again.
Right. So I so appreciate your whole energy of doing this and the fact that you teach others, especially that you turn your attention to young ones who are just so hungry for expressing who they are and the creativity, and they're so wide-eyed about what's out there and the possibilities. So thanks for doing what you do. I just think it's
Oh,
so fun.
thank you. I really feel like I'm on a mission, like to really change the conversation around creativity, to help people remember
Mm.
that's why we're here, is to do this work. And so that's why I want to be seen as somebody who really embraces it. That's really so important.
Well, thank you for letting me be part of your conversation. It was such a fun time talking with you. I can't wait to be able to actually work with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so glad that we could have this conversation together, especially in these times.
Yes, thank you. So during my conversation with Angie, I couldn't help but think of my niece's daughter, who has just turned 10. And as is true with any 10-year-old child, she has spent the bulk of her years drawing and painting, and she is a creative person. She also whittles. She makes spoons out of wood from the trees in their yard. And I see in her a certain confidence that I believe is in part attributed to, it's not an indulgence, but I think you know what I mean, her parents encouraging her creativity and supporting it. Of course, there's many more things. There are many more facets to us, but it is interesting that for some in society, that facet of creativity is superfluous. It's really not necessary. It's just a nice thing to have. But I love talking to people like Angie who are filled with it and want to help others experience it as well. It's kind of a nice break and a bit of a stress reliever for some. And just one final point. The end result, that timeless painting, that beautiful song, while we can enjoy that as a collective, all of the work that goes into it before we experience it is itself powerful and beautiful. I have the privilege of calling many of my friends absolutely creatives. They are artists. And to see what they produce, not just the end result, but the process of it, is an honor. I'm just going to leave this. We don't need to talk about all the bad stuff going on. We're just going to leave it at a high note and say, please continue to be safe. Always, no matter what, try to be kind. And thank you for listening.